let's talk about Night Swim, the latest Blumhouse movie that's just dropped in cinemas. I'm eager to share my thoughts on this one after a screening this afternoon, and there's going to be some spoilers ahead. Please share your honest reviews below when you've checked it out. Scout the links to the Horror Exchange while you're there for more content and clothing, but for now, here's my honest review of Night Swim. Right off the bat, Blumhouse movies are very hit and miss for me. More miss than hit, truth be told, because I think they've historically got bogged down in formulaic theatrical release horror tropes because they're a proven model, and this film does fall victim to that on a couple of occasions, from the standard old news articles for investigation and tracking down old victims who say all the right things to progress the story. However, with recent Blumhouse hits like Megan and intriguing upcoming projects like Imaginary, it seems like the studio is pushing in somewhat more interesting directions, and Night Swim is not an exception to that, in principle. Even though we are put into a standardized suburban American environment with domestic family themes as a centerpiece, which feels like the baseline scenario for most Blumhouse movies, Night Swim's intriguing central premise is what really captured my imagination going into this one, because it's about a deadly swimming pool, and that to me was a cool concept to try and wrap a film around. I enjoy swimming anyway, so that had me from the off, but the idea of an actual part of the property being responsible for the evil instead of just the bad juju energy emanating from everywhere was at least imaginative. I've gathered this film is an extension of a short film based on the same setup, which I do think is the better format for what you can do with that idea, and Night Swim at several points can feel like a bit of a drag because just how many interesting things can we do with a pool in the garden? And I can't stress enough how much you need to suspend your disbelief when it comes to the pool after every single member of the family, including the cat, of course there's a cat, is tormented by the pool, yet they still keep going on as normal and not really thinking more deeply about it. Oh, and you've got to suspend your disbelief on just how long people can breathe underwater as well. Standard. The obvious critique is just keep away from the pool and you'll be alright, though at least the pool is capable of possessing people who can carry the evil on outside those aquatic confines, so yeah, there's a bit of leeway there. It had a really Stephen King atmosphere in general, which I can't tell if it was an intentional homage or just coincidental. However, much like King's works, there is a formula which often works, and on the whole I do think Night Swim is more competent than a lot of people will likely credit it as, but it still has a lot of problems. The big scoring points here for me were in the production. The way Bryce Maguire directs the pool itself, the combination of high angles, underwater angles, and semi-submerged angles really dragged me into the water on the big screen. And combined with some great watery sound design, the texture of the film felt remarkably fluid, even down to the water effects placed on the film's credits. Night Swim possessed this luscious liquid aesthetic, and in many scenes the lighting is compiled of watery colours like greys and blues. It came across like a cohesive, connected piece, and I really did enjoy that direction. Also, the two leads in the film were pretty wonderful in my opinion. There's Wyatt Russell, who plays a semi-retired baseball player named Ray Waller, who's suffering from secondary stage MS and is trying to rehab back into returning to the sport. It's quite an original idea for a character, I must say, and it also cleverly links into buying the house with the pool because Ray can swim as water therapy for his body. The fact Maguire had the consideration to make the family buying a property with a pool as a character bond and not just for the sake of it was a nice touch. Ray's wife Eve, played by parallel universe Rebecca Ferguson, Kerry Condon, is a well-acted role, and her chemistry with her on-screen husband feels authentic. It's not exaggerated or typical. There is a natural feeling to it where I believed their support for each other and that they'd been through a lot of troubles together. They were a malleable couple. So we had a cool enough concept, leading roles I got invested in, and some strong cinematic visuals. All potent ingredients. So where did Night Swim fall under the surface for me? It's the third act issue I often have with Blumhouse films and the majority of theatrical horror releases. There were some sturdy building blocks earlier in the film and a clever use of false mini jumps that were well timed. One was a guy who slightly trips against the diving board while mid-sentence, something so small and sudden where the film pushed my focus elsewhere and then hit me with a little sharp shock. That was sick. But sadly, the jump scares involving the pool itself were all telegraphed fathoms off. And though there was a much desired preference for practical effects in the film, a lot of the demonic entities looked a bit wonky and unintimidating. I honestly feel like a horror movie about a killer swimming pool would have been much better suited to a comedy horror coating with acknowledged silliness and over-the-top madness. However, Night Swim takes itself so seriously in points and taps into properly bleak territory with life-impacting medical conditions, the deaths of children, possession, and sacrificing for love. The film's tone for the majority of the experience didn't quite work for me, despite the potential being rife. And even in film, all that build-up that was decent led to annoyances that come in that third act. It lost its grip and fell into that basic family horror mesh. One of the parents ends up turning bad and has to die to get rid of that bad. Same common problems, slightly different skin to try and mask them. And ironically, when the film cranks up its horror elements like vomiting black water, becoming possessed, encountering damned souls at the bottom of a never-ending pool, even though the horror dial is turned up, it feels less horrific. The further Night Swim pushed itself to be scary, the less scary it became. Sure, this one will likely freak out the aquaphobics and possibly the thalassophobics out there, but the terror in this one felt flat to me outside the opening half hour. The frustrations leapt out at me as the clock ticked along, including multiple examples of the "hey, I know it's you, it's not funny" prank belief that I want to ban from every film ever made from now on. Come on, Chad, it's not funny. And that's kinda my main takeaway from Night Swim. It's as though big studios say 80% of your film is ours, it's stuff we want to see, you can handle the other 20%. Because these films often do have 20% of brilliance tucked away in them, massively outnumbered by the volume of sameness. Look, Night Swim is what it is. It's a decent one for a one-time watch, but it doesn't inspire any additional watches for me. Sadly, it's not as deep as the pool itself, and the ripples it creates are incomparable. Thumbs up for good performances by the cast and some pretty great character setups, and also an overall well-directed movie with cracking visuals and sound. But my thumbs down go towards falling apart towards the end, having to just accept some silly decision making by the characters, and a handful of teeth-grinding moments that you've probably seen 1,000 times before. That right there is my honest review of Night Swim. If you want an out of 10, oh god, I don't really do this often. Go for maybe a 5.56 on a generous day. Go on, it's our first video of 2024. 6 it is. Don't forget to share your honest reviews and check out the Horror Exchange below. I've been Connor from Unleash the Ghouls, and cheers out.